systems nominal.
Hello my fellow Wanzer enthusiasts, I am Wanzer Sim, and this is the other black sheep of the Front Mission series, Front Mission Evolved. Yeah, when I did the video on Left Alive, I knew I was going to do something on Evolved. It took me a while, but finally here we are. So, this one came out in 2010, published by Squeenix, and developed by Double Helix Games, which I know some of you are already wincing at the mention of that studio. For those who don't know, before Evolved, their claim to fame was Silent Hill Homecoming and the tie-in game for G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra. Yeah, not exactly the greatest sign of quality. Then again, you have a studio like Teon making that Rambo video game everyone tries to forget about, and then coming out with Terminator Resistance and RoboCop Rogue City, back to back. Two great fucking games, might I add. So, you never know, really. I mean, you know what I mean? Obviously, we do know now. Evolve came out like 16 years ago, but you all get what I'm trying to say, right? You know, don't judge a book by its cover necessarily. From what I understand, Squeenix had scouted out a bunch of Western studios, and out of all of them, Double Helix was the only one not too busy to take on the job. This was around that time in the mid-aughts, where a lot of Japanese game companies were trying to tailor their releases more to what they thought Western audiences would want, which, yeah, let's face it, could be pretty hit or miss. Sometimes you get Binary Domain and Vanquish, and sometimes you get Mindjack and, Bomberman Act Zero. Yeah, that's a blast from the past, but nobody thought about that game in a very long time. Anyway, Evolved is a third-person mech action game in the vein of Mech Assault and the earlier gen of Armored Cores, with some infantry combat and some on-rails gunship turret sections thrown in, which I again know some of you are wincing at, specifically the classic turn-based strategy Front Mission fans. And you know what? I don't blame you. This was going to be the first Front Mission anything that those of us outside Japan had gotten since Front Mission 4 in 2003. That's 7 years of Wanzer-sized blue balls we're talking about here. Not quite Syndicate levels of pain, obviously, but still, you know. Not to mention, you're calling it Front Mission Evolved, which, intended or not, that makes some implications that would definitely rub fans of the mainline games the wrong way, I'll tell you. So that's 2 strikes against this game before it ever came out. If Evolved was ever going to have a chance of breaking out of that, it needed to knock it out of the park and be very impressive right from the get-go. And spoiler warning, it wasn't. I mean, to be fair, it's not the worst thing in the world. The moment-to-moment gameplay is entertaining enough, and I will say it looks nice for a PS3 game. Not top of the line, but certainly a lot better than what we've seen in some of the more recent remakes, for instance. You know what I'm talking about here. I'll even go as far as saying that the designs and animation on the Wanzers are honestly pretty damn good. I mean, very much in line with the ones from Front Mission 4 and 5. We've got some proper weight and heft to them, which is, always appreciated. The devs had said in the early promotional videos that one of their goals was to capture the feel of the intro cinematic of Front Mission 4 in the gameplay. And at least on that aspect, they did do pretty well. I mean, environments also look pretty good. There's plenty of props and stuff to blow up and step on, which is nice. I always appreciate that. The character designs are on the more cartoonish side, but they're nicely expressive, which I like. I'm reminded a bit of Second Sight by Codemasters. Have you ever played that one? Good game. And, yeah, speaking of characters, I'll admit it, Dylan Ramsey is a cliche, hot-blooded civilian mech pilot pulled into a wider conflict due to an endangered family member who has ties to the MacGuffin. Just like Kazuki from Front Mission 3, except Dylan isn't a dumbass who annoys the fuck out of me. Yeah, I'll go ahead and say that. You can quote me on that. I mean, even then, condemning this game with faint praise here, even then, I don't think that there was any way this was going to win over anyone who wasn't somehow already on board. I mean, despite some glimmers of something better, it's all fairly boilerplate. It's ultimately a mech game that's vastly overshadowed by the rest of its series and the other games in its genre. Let's not forget, Lost Planet 2 had already come out in May of that year. How's that for competition? Hell, I actually like Left Alive more. That's, damning myself there. Because that one at least failed due to overambition instead, while Evolve just feels like it's not really trying as hard as it could be, if you know what I mean. At the end of the day, Double Helix and Square Enix seem to have made a game that may take place in the Front Mission universe, but it lacks key elements of what makes that setting special. That's how you end up with a mecha anime version of a generic 2010s modern military shooter campaign with a really dumb plot. I mean, characters that range from likable but very shallow to an honest-to-God weaponized edgelord in the most literal sense of the term, and combat that ultimately doesn't require much from you in the way of tactics other than shoot the bad robot until it goes boom. I mean, to say nothing of the fact that on PC, at least, there's this very annoying bug that crops up during the on-foot sections that can frequently crash your game. I managed to power through and actually beat the game, but that should have been fixed years ago. And don't get me started on the fucking collectibles padding out the runtime with a scavenger hunt after every fight. I mean, all in all, the game itself is pretty forgettable. But what really bugs me about this is that the front mission setting is one that is practically tailor-made to my particular tastes. So I really want a proper fucking Wanzer Sim, goddammit. And I know it can be done because they kinda already did. Front Mission Online, released in 2005, in Japan only, of course. Thanks a lot, Squeenix, again. What do you have against this series? Jesus Christ. And that one was also a third-person action game with some out-of-mech running around in places like in the bases and stuff like that. And it was actually very well received. And while it has been rather difficult, I admit, to get in-depth information without abusing the Wayback Machine and Google Translate, what I have found paints a picture of a game that faithfully translated the gameplay mechanics of the turn-based games into not only a real-time action game, but a purely multiplayer one at that. Pretty impressive in and of itself. And that wasn't even the first action game in the series. Gun Hazard came out before Front Mission 2 was ever a thing, and it kicks ass. You can find the review I did of that one in this, I'll leave the link in the description. Hell, considering some of the plot points and plant mechanics, it wouldn't surprise me if Evolved had originally been pitched as Gun Hazard 2, but, I digress. But what really got me seriously thinking about this was that I finished my full playthrough of Heavy Gear for the channel a few months ago. I did a full video for a while before that going over the game in detail, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, Heavy Gear is a tabletop RPG and wargame setting created by DreamPod 9 up here in Canada that served as the basis of 2 video games, soon to be 3, when the third one's coming, by Activision back in the late 90s, after they lost the MechWarrior license, after doing MechWarrior 2, and MechWarrior 2 Ghost Bear's Legacy, and MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries. It runs on a modified MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries engine, and it's honestly one of my favorite mech games of that era. Highly recommended, provided you can get it running, of course. That's not always easy. Now, why am I bringing up a game that came out 2 years after the first Front Mission, back on the SNES? Because it is, I swear to God, the Front Mission mech sim we never got. Gears, the mechs in that game, are about 4 to 6 meters tall on average, so similar size to Wanzers. They come with rollers or treads on their feet, just like Wanzers. They're armed with handheld mech-scale firearms and shoulder-mounted hard points, just like Wanzers. Striders are the equivalent to Front Mission's big mobile weapons. And as it turns out, the mech customization in Heavy Gear 97, which is one of my favorite parts about the game, it may not be how gears are actually designed or modified in that setting, but it sure as hell looks a lot like how Wanzers are put together, right? Arms, legs, torso, everything. In fact, looking over what information I could find about Front Mission Online's controls, there's actually a surprising amount in common between the 2 games, as it turns out. So, aside from needing a new coat of paint and a massive software update, obviously, there's not much you need to change to make it the basis of a Front Mission action game. The setting, obviously, the specific parts and weapons the mechs are divided into, although I keep the drag and drop part internal upgrading stuff. That was really cool and actually matches up to the way you can upgrade the capabilities of individual parts in some of the games. Obviously, you need melee weapons. We eventually get those in Heavy Gear 2, but not in the original one. And definitely make it so you can equip more than just grenades in your mech's left hand. Get some proper Wanzer gun fu going, which, thanks to weapon groups, you could easily fire both at once. Point Heavy Gear there. Then again, Evolved had each hand and shoulder having its own dedicated fire button, which is also a good approach, but it does limit you to only having weapons in those spots. I, for one, would love to see the return of Wanzer parts with built-in weapons. Weapon arms, obviously, but also stuff like the Tall Dog or Gaff from Front Mission 2. Those ones had weapons built into the torso as well. It's just nice to have a backup when both your arms get blown off, You can also have like stuff like missile pods attached to your legs or some cool shit like that. That'd be pretty cool. Now, speaking of something to bring back from the other Front Mission games, items. No more power-ups littering the ground. We're not going for the arcade action game stuff. We're bringing back big old backpacks full of repair packs, weapon reloads, chaff and smoke, all that good stuff. I'd say that maybe let your Wanzer carry 1 or 2 without a dedicated item or combo backpack, but otherwise, if you run out of ammo in the field, either call in a resupply, which is something we definitely want to bring back, or just pick up a gun from a fallen Wanzer and keep blasting. I mean, you have hands, use them. And if you need repairs, well, hopefully you equipped a repair backpack on your mech or on one of your squad mates' mechs, because that's one thing that Evolve missed out on. Your allies throughout the game are pretty much only useful as distractions or occasional meat shields, which is one reason why the game feels very untactical, shall we say. It wouldn't need to get too in-depth, but being able to customize your team's Wanzers and issue battle commands would go a long way to translating the feel of the strategy games from the top-down to the more boots-on-the-ground perspective, which is what you want from a genre spin-off like this. Provided, of course, the NPC AI is up to it, obviously. But yeah, being able to have one of your squad mates with a repair backpack or some kind of recon backpack with advanced radar capabilities, and having, the game actually need that kind of thing to play would be very, very useful. Now, I mentioned resupply, and that tangentially brings me another part of Evolve, the on-foot sections. Right now, crash bugs aside, they're way too bland. You fire the same weapons at the same enemies, toss some grenades, awkwardly crouch behind low walls because they didn't bother to put in a proper cover system. Yeah. Originally, the idea was that you'd be able to leave your Wanzer at any time to go take care of objectives in places where a giant walking death machine couldn't. So basically, gun hazard again, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, they A, couldn't figure out how to balance the fact that you might end up fighting outside your mech in normal gameplay, and B, decided not to cut it entirely instead, which leads us to what we got. Personally, I would love to have that initial concept implemented, if only because I'm a big Lost Planet and Titanfall fan, but if so, it would definitely need to be beefed up significantly, and that balance problem is legitimate, which is why you probably need to be able to either hijack empty Wanzers, go the front mission 3 route and have ways of ejecting enemy pilots so you can take their ride, either, some kind of special attack, like, the grenade, special grenades in Genome, if you ever played that game. Another one that wasn't particularly good, but, memorable at least. Or, going back to the resupply thing I was talking about, call in fresh backup Wanzers from base via airdrop, assuming you have enough resources for it. Now, obviously, that only works when you're outdoors, which neatly brings me into level design. As it is, Evolved is a linear series of combat arenas linked by hallways with frequent stops to poke around for cash under the cushion seats and way too many useless collectibles. Trying to get the 100% on all the sensors is a pain in the ass, I'll tell you that much. I want to go back to the kind of maps from the earlier games. I'm thinking specifically of Front Mission 4, which had maps that covered about the same area as other mech sims, such as Heavy Gear or the Mech Warrior titles. So good size to them. We need that space because it keeps everything from just turning into a brawl where all the fighting ends up in close quarters. The environments you face, the terrain types, the availability of cover, weather conditions, again, Front Mission 4, determine optimal tactics just as much as the enemies do. The trick is to balance long-range weapon accuracy and radar detection ranges so that shorter-range guns and melee combat don't become obsolete. There would also definitely be smaller, more cramped environments, of course, like, in previous Front Missions. Like underground bases, urban combat zones where those latter weapons would suddenly be your go-to when the enemy pops up right in your face from around a corner. And this is also where those secondary movement systems would come in to get you across distances quickly under fire, so you can, get that pile bunker up in the cockpit there. Of course, there'd be limitations. I'm partial to the Heavy Gear version where skating is a toggle rather than something that runs on an energy meter, so you can just, keep it going as much as you want. But in such a case, we're definitely keeping crash damage and knockdown, something that Gun Hazard and Front Mission Online also respectively did, by the way. Yeah, you smack yourself into a wall at full speed, it's going to hurt, and chances are you're going to end up flat on your ass, and, extremely vulnerable to enemy fire, so careful. And also, it would probably take you from being able to strafe and dodge left and right like that, and stick you in tank control, since that's basically what you're doing. Oh, and fun fact, Front Mission Online and Heavy Gear 97 both let you overburden your mech past its normal weight limit at the cost of rapidly losing speed and stability. Again, I know all this stuff I'm talking about can work, because most of the work is already done in the 90s, for Christ's sakes. Ugh, man, missed opportunities. So what else? Well, an interesting aspect of Front Mission Online was that there were facilities in nearby area maps, buildings of such, that would affect each other throughout the, different multiplayer matches. So for instance, if you and your boys were going on a PvP match within range of another map's radar installation, well, then the other team automatically knew where you were unless you thought to equip a backpack with radar jamming. I mean, you can implement this either in mission with facilities like radar dishes, comm stations, artillery positions, Wanzer repair base, supply depots that could be captured or destroyed, either as primary or optional objectives. I mean, just being able to capture a Wanzer repair bay is very, very useful if you don't have, items littering the ground to fix yourself. Or, perhaps you could also have this stuff deployed between missions, like in some of the MechWarrior games. Specifically, I'm thinking MechWarrior 4 and a couple of those were like that, where you'd pick a mission to, say, take out an airfield, and then the rest of the missions in that zone, that particular chapter, I guess, wouldn't have as much air support anymore because you blew it up already. You take out the radar and the enemy's blind. You take out the radio tower and they can't call for help, etc., etc. Again, just because it's an action game doesn't mean it has to lose the strategic elements that made Front Mission what it was. So, I think that covers it for the meat and potatoes of gameplay, but there's another important aspect, and that's what you typically did between mech fights, namely the RPG part of SRPG. When you weren't blowing things up, you spent time in various towns, outposts, or military bases where you could talk to various NPCs, including your own teammates often. You could shop for parts at the local Wanzer shop, go to the arena or the simulators for extra cash and XPs, check the network that started in Front Mission 2 and continued into Front Mission 3 for various info, secrets. You could find passwords to unlock hidden Wanzer parts and all sorts of stuff like that. That kind of thing. The best version of that by far, I think, was in Front Mission 5, where instead of just menus over still backgrounds, they went for something way more diegetic with the kind of different parts of the base mapped out along with their occupants that you could go and talk to, interact with. Very immersive without requiring a full level map be built, so good for resources. Stuff like that is definitely something Evolve could have used along with the usual cutscenes to flesh out characters and world building. Show us a bit what this world taking place so far into the future of the Front Mission universe is, give this next part of the Front Mission timeline some room to breathe and actually kind of explore what's been going on since Front Mission 3, which is the previous chronological game at the time. Which, of course, brings us to the plot. Now, the idea of a false flag from an unknown group causing a war to break out between the UCS, OCU, and their allies is a fine one. No problems there. Well, there is a problem. The problem is that it's way too much of a hurry to wrap things up. There's no mystery. You know very quickly that the OCU isn't responsible once their orbital elevator gets taken out too, which happens not even in a proper cutscene, but in the Act 3 mission briefing. So, yeah, that's something I would have liked to see. That's something I would have liked to participate in, frankly. One thing I do know is that the original script for Evolve was much longer than what's in the actual game, but got significantly cut down. Stuff like this is where you really feel that. And of course the characters being such, paper thin most of the time. That script was written by Motomu Toriyama and Daisuke Watanabe, both of whom have written for a lot of video games, mostly Final Fantasy to be fair, but since I've never been able to find the full version of what they wrote, I can't really judge the quality here. For all I know, what they wrote was really, really good, a really, really good story, and just got, chopped to shit in editing. Anyway, my point is, we needed more build-up. We needed this war to actually grind on a bit. Now, assuming we wanted to stick to the main Front Mission setting and not go full Gundam Wing and just make Gun Hazard 2, I'd say, first of all, what we need to assume, and we're going, we're spitballing, a bit of a plot outline here, we gotta assume that the Alyssa ending for Front Mission 3 is the canon one. For those who don't know, Front Mission 3 had two different scenario paths that starting from the early on in the game. One where you followed Emma, and one where you followed Kazuki's sister, Alyssa. Now, in the Alyssa one, the Midas WMD incident doesn't get fully resolved, which means the tensions between the OCU, UCS, and DHZ, the Republic of Dahanzong, will still be running high by the time the plot kicks off in this game, giving us a reason for a decade-long Cold War that goes hot after a major incident. And also, the Imaginary Numbers program, which involved creating enhanced superintelligent humans through genetic engineering, well, that's still active in this ending, which gives us a perfect source of manipulative, power-hungry bad guys to either pull the supernation's strings from the shadows or fighting giant robots as needed. Yeah. No more Sword of Damocles, or Damocles as the guy pronounces it. No more Conrad Werner, Edgelord Supreme. We could keep the Apollo's Chariot, but they definitely need a bit of a rewrite in terms of characterizations. Gloria's outfit can stay. I have no problem with that, frankly. But yeah, definitely we want something that has a bit more of a tie-in to the previous games, and having these guys as the villains does make sense since they've already been in a villain position previously, and now we're just extending that forward into having them had time to start build up their strength again since the last time they tried something. You can keep the initial setup, I think, which has you playing as Dylan Ramsey. You lose your dad in the attack, get recruited to the UCS military. With a more involved plot, however, you then have a chance to see him grow from a green but talented recruit to a proper combat-hardened Wanzer pilot. Not to mention, you give the rest of the cast more depth as well, so it's win-win all around there. So, the official setup is fairly similar. We can have the inciting incident be the OCU attacking the UCS base in New York after they receive intel that they've been working on recreating the Midas device from Front Mission 3. Whether or not they also blow up an orbital elevator at the same time, well, we can save that for later or have it happen right away. We never know. So, true or not, it doesn't really matter at this point. The attack also serves as cover to kill or capture Dylan's dad, which neatly brings us to the Edge system. Simply put, we're going to scrap it. Page 1 rewrite. Well, okay, no, well, not quite. The idea of a wireless neural interface that doesn't have all the issues the B and S devices did is definitely something the R&D folks would love, but having it be the mech bullet time thing is kind of dumb, let's face it. Now what I have in mind is more like if you ever read the manga Dog Life Dog Style, the Front Mission manga, it's made by the same guy who did Gundam Thunderbolt as well. It's well worth writing. It's gritty as fuck, but and kind of edgy in certain ways, but it's really, really good. Anyway, there's a system there called the Doll Eyes system, where you see pilots take in and process incredible amounts of combat data at lightning speed. Like they're literally speaking in QR codes. It's so much information is passing at once. Except instead of cybernetics, as is in this case, here the pilot would wear some kind of neuro helmet instead. That's what the Edge system would be, a command and control system that allows individual combat personnel to see the whole battlefield and all its variables in a single instant, predict likely outcomes, and immediately be able to act on them, giving users the tactical edge, so to speak. Well, okay, the acronym would probably have to change, but you get the idea. In terms of gameplay, this means that at any time you'd be able to kind of tactical pause, like in something like Mass Effect, pulling the view back and highlighting all the enemies you and your squad are aware of. It makes a good recon Wanzer very useful, I think you'll agree. And then letting you call out targets, issue movement orders, call in support, then unpause and see it all carried out immediately. Like, visually, it should probably almost look like you've switched back to the POV of the turn-based front missions. That would be actually a pretty cool callback when you think about it like that. As for the plot importance of the system, I would say that the imaginary numbers driving the world to war would love to get access to technology like this. You cross it with a little bit of Front Mission 2 Fenrir AI control tech, and suddenly you got a device can be used to bring the whole world under a single ruler after all its super nations have worn themselves down from all this fighting. So you take the whole world without borders thing from Front Mission Evolved, only not lame. I mean, I think that's pretty much the good starting point for a plot that could go on for quite a bit of time. Do it, probably go on twice the number of missions that are in Evolved, but actually have some sense of depth and grit to it, and actually have a story worthy of the previous game's depth. Because there's one thing that the Front Mission games of the past had, it's, some damn good stories. I'm honest to admit that. Anyway, I've gone on long enough on this. I think there's still plenty more I could rant about or change, but I think I'll leave the rest of all this all to you in the comments to hash out. I mean, what would you want out of a Wanzer combat game? Do you even think it would be a good idea to even try? I mean, we're certainly getting attempts to bring back the spirit of the Front Mission's turn-based gameplay. I, for one, think that something like this would also be doable. As I said before, they almost did it already. And if they almost did it once, I mean, hell, they can certainly try it again. I'm certainly hoping someone does. I have been Zero Sum. Thank you for watching. Like, share, sub. You know the drill. Until next time, I'm ejecting. Bye-bye.
All primary objectives complete. Mission successful.